Just make sure your cell phone's on.
And good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, January 3rd, 2025. It is a new year and we're happy to be back here. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, back after being home in San Francisco for the holidays.
Welcome back, Mitch Perry.
Yes, that's the voice of independent journalist Ben Montgomery. Ben, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Our colleague, Ray Rowan, will be here with us shortly. Ray's actually working. He's literally on assignment right now with Creative Loafing.
That's how we do it.
Yes.
Sometimes
we are
work our
working
way
reporters.
right in the door.
So, Ben, Happy New Year. Did you have a good holiday season here?
I did, sure enough. And interestingly, I was sort of on the edge of my seat over something completely unrelated to celebration for the new year. December 31st was a deadline for applications for the former victims, the wards of the Florida School for Boys, also known as the Dozier School for Boys. These men who have been telling their story publicly about being abused at that facility in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. They were given a chance to apply for a chunk of $20 million that the state set aside as compensation for their suffering. And I was interested to know what the number was, how many of these men, because at one point that was the largest reform school in the country in the 1960s. Anyhow, 800. We now know that more than 800 men have applied.
That's
for
way more than I was told that was going to apply. I heard 400.
Yeah, we're looking at closer to 400 or 500, and it was a number that a lot of people wrestled over. What's a fair amount of money for the number of men when you don't know how many there are? It's hard to say how much people should get and how much you should set aside.
Let me just say right now, Ben, there is of course, your great reporting about the Dozier School for Boys with the Tampa Bay Times a decade or so ago. There's a new fiction. There was, of course, a novel by Colson Whitehead called the Nickel Boys.
Pulitzer Prize winning novel.
Yes, that came out, and now there's a new theatrical film that's going to be coming out this month, and you have seen it.
I have. I saw the screener at AMC West Shore a couple of weeks ago. I was invited to kind of get a firsthand look before other people did. And I got to say, it was a powerful film, to see. First of all, to see the sort of the nonfiction that I and many other reporters had been working on, kind of presented in fiction form in the book "The Nickel Boys" by Colson Whitehead, which won the Pulitzer Prize, was one thing. It was so interesting to see somebody get inside the heads of some of the kids who might have been there, and but to see that presented on the big screen. So it's like a double reinterpretation, an interpretation of the nonfiction, then an interpretation of the book. To see that on the big screen was a powerful thing, and came very close, I got to say, to the images that were unfolding on the screen. Came very close to what I pictured when these men were telling me the stories of being tortured and abused at the Florida School for Boys. It's a powerful movie. It made me hurt physically, and I've read a lot of the criticism about it. And it's Richard Brody from The New Yorker is calling it the best movie of 2024.
The way he films it, apparently, the way he films it, the director is unique. Apparently, the perspective, literally the perspective.
Yeah, the follows the couple of characters, boys. They sort of age through time, and it bounces back and forth through time a little bit, but. They also superimpose these actual photographs of exhumations of a cemetery at the Dozier School for Boys. Real photographs of forensic anthropologists in the bottom of graves, sort of sweeping away dirt from the remains of boys who actually died. They superimpose that throughout the film, and so it carries this feeling of both like a piece of fiction and also a documentary. It's really a moving piece if you get a chance.
I can't wait when that comes out. We want to say Ray has joined us. Ray Roa. Good morning,
Ray.
What's
going on, guys? How are you? Sorry, a little bit late.
Yeah, and it's all good. And we're going to talk about youth in politics. And in fact, let's introduce our first guest right now who has joined us here, Sabrina Bousbard. Sabrina, you might remember, ran for Congress last summer in the Florida Congressional District 13 seat, which is Pinellas County, most of Pinellas, but not St. Petersburg. And she came in second to Whitney Fox, who, of course, ultimately lost to Anna Paulina Luna. But we want to talk about this, and we're also going to talk to somebody later in the show who was running for the vice chair, who was only 20 years old. field. So we want to emphasize with the Democratic Party, people looking at what's going on with the Democrats as the new year begins here. And state. By the way, we're going to have somebody who's running for the Democratic National Committee chair. There's an election for that in a month, and we will have that person on later this month. Couldn't make it tonight. But anyway, this morning, I should say. But Sabrina, welcome to The Skinny.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me back.
Great
Welcome
to
back.
see you. Great
Thank
to see you. Sabrina, so much I want to talk to you about, but basically, let me just bring up this thing about the youth vote, because we all know when looking at the election, Donald Trump basically did better with so many different groups than he did ever before, and Kamala Harris did worse, frankly, with a lot of Democratic groups, including the youth vote. Let me bring this up here. This is from, according to the Tufts University Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, turnout from voters aged 18 to 29 was down between 10 to 12% from 4 years ago. And that coincided with a shift in favor of Donald Trump, whose support from young voters is up 10% from 2020. By contrast, in 2020, President Joe Biden won the young white male demographic over Trump by 15%. 4 years later, Trump reversed that margin, winning among young white men across all races by 14% compared to Kamala Harris, and his lead doubled to 28% among young white men specifically. So in your case, looking at this whole thing, the election, you were, of course, a Joe Biden person. You worked, we should tell people about you. So you worked for you actually campaigned for Joe Biden, 2019, 2020?
Yes, in Iowa. I was one of the organizers there.
And then you worked in the administration.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I was at the Department of Health and Human Services doing COVID-19 response. And then after that, transitioned into general preparedness and response. So natural disasters, other pandemics, diseases, and then worked in the White House 2 years later at the Office of Political Strategy and Outreach, where I did really strategic outreach. So engagement, how do we make sure policies communicate to Americans? How do we make sure your stakeholders across the nation are hearing the message directly from the White House? So that was sort of the roles I took on for about 3 years in the administration.
Yeah. Well, how'd you, I know you're a Biden person. You're very much passionate for Joe Biden. He's, when we look now back at what happened, some people are saying basically, he shouldn't have ran for re-election. He shouldn't have announced he should have run for re-election. Where do you stand on that?
Well, the past is the past, right? Like, we can't go back into the past and change it to have a better outcome. I honestly think the outcome was going to be the outcome no matter who it was, in my opinion, yes.
A lot of people are saying that now. Yeah. We're saying it before November 5th.
Yeah, I know. Well, I believed, right? November 5th, I was hopeful. I actually thought we were going to win this. I really thought Kamala Harris was going to win this election. And after November 5th, it was, a great slap in the face where I had to really reflect on what happened, what was the miscommunication, what were the gaps. And I think we're going to grapple for this for many years. But, for me, I've always been very supportive of President Biden. The reason I chose him in the very beginning was because of the work he did as vice president, mainly a lot of the work he did as a U.S. senator. I've always honored him through my political science and international affairs degree at FSU. And so for me, it was more of a personal choice that I've seen how his work ethic is for the middle class and how he's really about doing what's best for all Americans. So that was a message that attracted me to him in 2019. And when he decided to run for re-elect, I wasn't really surprised by it. You're a president who's doing great work. You're passing the bipartisan infrastructure law, which not a lot of presidents have been able to do. You're passing the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act. I mean, the list goes on, right? Of course, you're going to want to think about rerunning and trying to finish the job, as he said in the beginning. So I was very supportive of it. And of course, after the presidential debates and the outcomes that we saw from how the American people were feeling, from how younger people were feeling, I respected his decision to step back and support Vice President Harris. I still agree with that whole scenario we had. I think it was the first time we saw Democrats actually take a risk and go for it. And so for me, when it comes to President Biden, I was behind him all the way. I respected his work. I respected his work ethic. Ageism is a thing we don't talk a lot about. If you believe you are capable of doing the job, especially as a young person, I always say it's sort of interesting seeing both ends of the spectrum. You should respect that person because they believe they can still do it. And so for me, that's why I was very supportive of President Biden's decision to run and then also drop out and support Vice President Harris. So I sort of stood on the Biden side, really, because that's just where I come from. That's who I am. I'm a firm believer in his work ethic and the work he's done for Americans. I think at the end of the day, we did everything we could. And that's why I believe that if it was President Biden or Vice President Harris or someone else, we were still going to lose.
Yeah. You are, excuse me, guys, I'm going with a question here, and you guys jump in. You're half Latina and half Arab, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's get your Latina side, if you will, because now there's a lot of talk about Latino men, but,
right.
The Latino vote, Hispanic vote, has not just 2024, but 2022. We saw this in Florida, and more nationally, is moving to the Republican Party overall. There's a lot of writings about this, a lot of stuff going on about that. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I've always known we were losing the Latino vote since like 2018. As a Floridian, as a Colombian, as someone who has tons of family in Miami, when I organized for President Biden, I also was in Miami-Dade for the general in 2020. And so I started seeing the transition in 2018 when I noticed Republicans started investing into Latino communities and Latino messaging. And by 2020, when I was working in Miami-Dade, I sort of saw it with my own eyes. Every radio show I turned on, I would hear ads. Every TV I had on, I would see ads.
Spanish
language. Donald Trump, very pro-Donald Trump, very pro-Republican. They were really good at targeting Democrats as socialists and that we're going to take them back to the way Cuba or Venezuela or whatever you might want to sort of compare their countries to. And myself, I have cousins who voted for Donald Trump this election. I had cousins who voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Did they change their mind in 2020? Yes, they did. But it was very fascinating to see my cousins go through sort of the phases as well within my own family. And I've always been saying this, that Democrats needed to invest more money into Latino communities, into Latino messaging, into combating the socialist narrative that the Republicans have really won with in Florida. I see it more from a Florida aspect, right? Yeah. What's going on in Arizona is completely different than what's going on here in Florida. And so for me, I've always felt we were losing the Latino community. So I was not surprised by this election when I saw Latino men were turning out for Donald Trump more than for Democrats in general. I was not surprised when I saw Latinos in general also move the spectrum. I mean, when you think about it, almost every demographic moved spectrums back to the Republican Party, which is just wild to think about. And so, we have a lot of work to do when it comes to Latinos and like the messaging that we really need to like hammer down there. But it's not impossible. It's just going to take time and it's going to take investment. And I think that's going to be like the problem these next 8 to 10 years we're going to see is how are we going to get the investment necessary to change the messaging and to really get to the communities, especially Latinos in South Florida, to show them that Democrats are really trying to work for them and make their lives better too.
When some of the Monday morning quarterbacking and the in-camp criticism of the Biden campaign was that they didn't do a good job of interpreting some of the big legislation that he directed to the American people. Many of us don't know. We couldn't tell you many things about the 4 or 5 different good bills that you just listed. That there were bipartisan legislation, big pieces, important things. Do you feel like that's a fair criticism? These are things you worked on directly.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. I mean, when you're working on it directly, you see it yourself, right? Like I saw how the Inflation Reduction Act helped us recover from COVID-19 and helped make sure that people were able to get more jobs. And I personally was able to connect with it. But, an American won't, right? Like you have to be able to communicate to them how the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act or all of those different legislations help them. But I think the problem is that they won't feel it right now in that moment, right? The way the economy works is it takes a few months. It takes years even sometimes with these investments. Right now in Tampa with our highways, right? We're seeing a lot of construction, but that's going to be helped by the bipartisan infrastructure law, but we won't really see it for another 4 or 5 years until it's fully into effect. And that's all because of what President Biden did. And so I totally agree, right? We've lost a way of translating, all of these great legislations and how it actually helps Americans. And I think the biggest problem too is that they just didn't feel it, right? And that was one of the biggest things that we saw with the voters is the economy.
Yes. Does it feel like we're echoing the Carter line right now?
James Carville, by the way, has an op-ed in the New York Times that basically says I was wrong, and it really does come back to the economy. If the economy's stupid,
Carter did great things.
But the inflation killed him.
It killed him. The gas crisis.
And it's interesting though, going back
because Americans are selfish when it comes right down to it, right?
They think with their pockets.
We were speaking, by the way, with Sabrina Buspar. She is a 27-year-old young Democrat who ran for Congress last summer in the Democratic primary in Congressional District 13 in Pinellas County. We also welcome your phone calls here about this. We want to bring up Jimmy Carter, actually, definitely bring them up in this conversation here, because I think there are a lot of parallels, maybe some negative, frankly, between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, one the obvious being both one-term presidents here. But we've got some 813-239-9663 is the phone number if you want to call in here on our first show of 2025. You can also send us an email at dj@WMNF. And let's actually John from Sarasota, who's piped in immediately here. I'm not sure we know what John's wants to talk about. John, you're on the Skinny.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Thanks for the call.
Good. Hey, I know I had a question about the Dozier School. Were any of those guards or wardens ever prosecuted?
No prosecutions. One was the subject of a lawsuit, what started as a class action lawsuit, but actually because of technicalities sort of fell out of court and fell apart. The state, after a thorough forensic investigation, looked very closely for any evidence of the two crimes that would have been prosecutable 50 years after they occurred, which was capital murder and capital rape, the rape of a kid under the 12 or younger. And there was no substantial evidence that could have been presented at a trial that would have been charges against anyone living. So that's the end of the story in terms of criminal prosecution at the Dozier School.
Thanks for the call there.
Unbelievable. That is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
The other quick question is there any way you can find the name of those guards and wardens?
Oh yeah, we've known the name of many of them. There were state employees, so their employment history is often public record. The problem is many of them are dead, and and it was a case where the closest they got in terms of forensic analysis, the closest they ever got to proving that a kid had died was they found a ball, a metal sphere that was consistent with buckshot in what would have been the abdomen area of one of the boys. But he had been dead 60 years at that point, and
you couldn't prove who did it.
Yeah, right. Who did it, or even that was in fact a bullet.
So,
all right, thank you.
The other thing, I don't know if you guys ever been around that area, around Sneed, Mariana, anything like that.
Oh yeah,
those people are from a different place.
Thank you for the phone call, John. Let's go one more call, and then we'll go back to Sabrina and talk about Jimmy Carter. I do want to bring him up here. Wes in Tampa. Wes, you're on the Skinny.
Yes. One of your guests just a moment ago, when speaking about Jimmy Carter's presidency and why he lost, said that's because Americans are selfish.
I said that.
I'm a lifelong Democrat, and y'all need to re-examine what it is that you say. You're talking about doing better messaging that allows the Republicans to beat us as being anti-American. You need to look at the things you're saying.
Sorry, that wasn't a guest. I'm sorry, that wasn't a guest. That was me. That was Ben Montgomery. I'm a host, and I said that sort of facetiously, but
I understand that. But you've got to look at the messaging you're putting out. You allow the Republicans to beat us over the head with this claim that we're anti-American, and it's a mistake. It's a colossal mistake.
Fair point.
I think that's a good point, but I think another point and thank you for the call that we should make is,
Wes,
here as the host, we're not on any side or trying to massage the messaging for anybody. So that's a point. Mitch, before you get into Jimmy Carter, can I ask you a quick question about Florida, Sabrina? Mm-hmm. You ran in this primary that was arguably one of the most qualified fields out there between you, Liz, and Whitney. There was a lot of optimism about the race once it all shook out against Anna Paulina Luna, but after election night, the numbers really were a little bit devastating. And across Florida, continuing to do this armchair quarterback thing some months after now, how are you feeling about Democrats' chances in Florida? The leadership that we have, we're going to talk, a little bit later about Democratic leadership, but what are we doing in Florida to get young people voting, to win back some of those Latinos that you were talking about, maybe to win some elections here or not lose by such wide margins?
Yeah, we were all shocked, right? Mm-hmm. Seeing how Florida went really red, even in the District 13 seat.
That was a 10-point deficit.
10 points.
Luna won by 8 points 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And and it's a great question, Ray, because and when you guys were here and we did the debate back in July,
that was my favorite debate. I thought it was the most substantive thing. Yeah,
we had a great time.
And I said this to your party chair, former party Jennifer Griffith. I'm like, why are those folks think that they have a chance to win? And I don't mean to be cynical about it. You need to have people believe they can do that.
Right.
It just that CD13, which is like a lot of the state now, is. Again, that was a classic case. That district, or Pinellas County overall, went with Joe Biden in 2020 by a little less than half a percentage point, but it won for Biden. It's been a classic swing county for decades. And it went, I think for 5 points roughly, the county itself. But yeah, Luna beat Whitney Fox by 10 points. You were shocked by that.
Yeah, I was, right? I mean, and I think it really correlates a lot to the national results if you think about it, right? Like, we had expected women to turn out a lot for the Democratic Party, but there was this feeling that, okay, well, President Trump, before the election came out saying that he would veto a federal abortion. So maybe people felt, okay, the abortion ban is not as hurtful or damaging as I thought it was. So maybe I can go and vote for President Trump because I really care about the economy right now. And I feel as though I'm not, making a living out of what I'm working with right now. And so I think, we saw women also change and lean towards the Republicans. We also felt as though those undecided voters, which we were talking about for months during the election cycle, would go to the ballot and change their vote to Democrats, because in that moment they would realize that, President Donald Trump or Anna Paulina Luna are these people on the other side of the spectrum. I mean, super extreme, right? They're not just Republicans.
The political spectrum.
Right, yeah, political spectrum. And so we had assumed or thought or were hopeful to think that people would go with the Democrats because the Democratic messaging was middle class, helping people, protecting women's rights, all of those kinds of positive pro-democracy narratives. And we didn't see that, right? And so, of course, I was shocked. I think a lot of us
And also, you must
shocked.
have thought, and all the Democrats running in that race, in a district that does lean, I think, +5, +6 Republicans,
+6.
that you would get the NPA vote.
Correct.
And that didn't really happen. What we've learned, and again, we've talked about this on the show, is that the NPA vote, people, I think, a lot of times think it's a centrist vote, and that those voters can go either way. And in fact, most cases, they're not. They're solidly Democrat or Republican, but for different reasons, they don't want to register as that. People don't like the political parties, but yet their ideology, in many cases, is more conservative or more liberal, and they're like the Democratic Party, Republican Party is still a little too wimpy for me.
Seesaw, what do they call that? Seesaw voters or something like that? There's a name for it, Yeah.
I mean, yes, right? The NPAs were a part of the conversation. Young people, Latinos. I mean, we just saw everything shift. And so that's why I was shocked, because I wasn't expecting that shift, right? With the messaging we were seeing from Vice President Harris's campaign to the positive messaging we were seeing with the FDP chair. And, Whitney was running a great campaign as well, right? We really thought not just in this district, but in the state of Florida, it was always going to be red, but maybe not that red.
Right.
So when you ask about, the future of Florida, we have to come up with a strategic plan here. We need not just a 2 to 4 year situation. We need a 10 to 20 to 30 year plan. And I know, Chair Fried has talked about how she has a 10-year strategy and she's running for re-election and she really wants to get started on something like that. And I think, that plan needs to target, how are we talking to Latino voters? How are we talking to young people? How are we talking to white men, right? You mentioned in the beginning, Mitch, a lot about, how white men really shifted in comparison to 2020 with Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And so I really think for us, it's going to take a while here in the state of Florida. I don't lose hope, though, right? One of my favorite quotes is, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue to it's the courage to continue that counts, right? And so for me, it's that last phrase, the courage to continue, that counts. And in Florida, we really, as Democrats, need to focus on that no matter how many times we keep failing, we just have to keep going, and we have to put a strategy forward that will help us win. And so for me, that's Democratic leadership, and that is really just investing in our future here.
That is the voice of Sabrina Buspar. She is a young 27-year-old who ran for Congress last year in Pinellas County. We're talking about the Democratic Party here in Florida and nationally, how they pick up the pieces. Let's see, we've got a listener calling in, or writing in, saying, I like that Maxwell Frost is a young person who won a congressional seat, actually just reelected in November. Could your guest borrow his toolbox for victory? And he also writes, I'm tired of the Trumpsters. When can we deprogram them? Well, see, now some people say
that's an interesting district that Frost is working in.
Just wrote in and said, that is demeaning, et cetera, et cetera. But I will say this before you answer, Sabrina, and that is, I do think that going nationally, the Democrats a lot of their messaging has been, we're not Donald Trump, going back to 2015, because he is so, quote unquote, abominable and, quote, deplorable voter, and all that. That is no longer obviously worked very well this past year. And I think that is something that people in the party, I hope, appreciate. Because you got to have more than that. And I know there is. Like you said, there's policy, but there's also... anyway, I'm sorry.
It's going to be weird because there's going to be like another Donald Trump, and the Democrats will have to resist that tactic. Again, we're not that guy or girl.
I hate to break it to you, but MAGA's not going anywhere. Right? MAGA is the Republican Party now. That's what this election showed us. When you look at the congressional results, when you look at the Senate results, when you look at the president results, it's not going anywhere. It is now a part of the Republican Party. And so for us, it's how do we actually talk to them? How do we reach out to them? I think we need, and I agree with the other person who just mentioned, we don't need to be anti-American. We need to be pro-American, but we need to talk about what does pro-American mean? And that's where I really, wish President Biden's administration, us would have emphasized a little bit more is that whole, we're working for the middle class. Think about COVID-19 recovery. We really got into this administration. We worked so hard to get the country back to where it is. When you look at countries across the world, we are doing the best possible. And so, communicating that is what we really need to get down to. I think also when it comes to the messaging around anti-Donald Trump, we need to throw that away. It needs to be gone. We need to talk about the economy. We need to talk about what does it actually mean to be voting for a Democrat. I think a lot of people have different thoughts about what Democrats are and what we stand for. And I think that happens internally within the own party, right? Is what are we? What do we stand for? And, when I really was thinking about losing the white messaging with younger men, specifically young white men, I thought to myself, what messaging do we do for young white men? And I couldn't really think of anything, right? We had been leaning so much on reproductive rights and women's rights, which we should, right? It is important. We've been really leaning on, LGBTQ rights and all of the different demographics and minorities. And I think that is the Democratic Party, but we also should be talking about what we're going to do for young white men. What are we going to do for young people? Right. And to me, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, did have that messaging. She was talking about giving tax credit for first buy owners for homes. And so, I think we just didn't really narrow it enough for younger people to really think, okay, this is the difference between Donald Trump and Vice President Harris.
We're going to go to another younger, I'm sorry, Ben.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of young white men, David Hogg, a survivor of the Parkland school shooting turned gun safety advocate, has launched a bid for one of the DNC vice president positions.
Yeah, vice chair.
What is that inspirational? Is that, that's the move in the right direction, you think?
Yeah, so we all know each other, right? I know Jaden's about to be on, and so is David Hogg. David Hogg is running for the national vice chair position. But I do think younger people deserve a seat at the table. I know someone mentioned Maxwell Frost's toolbox. Him and I had several conversations during my race, and he did help out. And, it's tough when you're young, right? We have to raise money. And how are you expected to raise $1 million when you're 26 years old, right? Let's talk about that. And also at the same time, a lot of the questions you get is, are you experienced enough? Right. What makes you qualified? And people have this understanding that you need years and years and years of experience. But in reality, I'm a firm believer Congress should really look like America, right? It should be representative. We have a lot of people I think the middle age of Congress is 65, 55 years old, 60, something like that. And so, and they're making decisions on the behalf of young people that are going to impact our future. And we don't have anyone at the table besides Congressman Maxwell Frost. And so for me, seeing David Hogg running, having Jaden running, having young people stepping up and finding a seat at the table is so crucial, because they're not just going to help with this messaging and communication and social media aspect, but they're going to help develop the policy of our future. And I think that's what's really important in having youth, in leadership.
Well, Sabrina just mentioned him, so let's bring up on the air via Zoom Jaden D'Onofrio. He is the 20-year-old chair of the Florida Future Leaders PAC. That's a political action committee, which is working for college students and high school students to try to get to that represent that constituency here in Florida. Jaden, are you with us?
I am here. Thank you so much for having me, Mitch. And shout out Sabrina. Big Sabrina fan here. Just want to
Hey, Jaden.
All right. Well, great to have you here. We're having you on here. We could just talk about the fact that you raised over $1 million with the Florida Future Leaders PAC last year, which is pretty amazing as a 20-year-old. But also now you're going beyond that. You're now running for the vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. That's the position right behind Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried, who is currently running unopposed, we should say. So first question for you is simply, why do you want to be the vice chair of the FDP?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's this state, we have so much work to do. And my biggest philosophy is essentially we have to build the next generation of leaders, candidates, and voters for the Democratic Party here in the state. And, for me, when I look at something like that and the work that we were able to do this year through the Florida Future Leaders PAC, I think there's a real availability to do it. Our Democratic Party is down about 1.2 million voters to the Republican Party in this state. And if we're ever going to bridge that gap, it's by, registering voters all across the state of Florida, catering towards youth while doing that, focusing on certain target precincts across multiple different state House, state Senate, congressional districts. And making sure that everyone has a seat at the table to spread new ideas. And I want to bring some new ideas within the party. I want to bring some new blood into the party. And I want to make sure that we're fundraising the amount of money that we need to be able to do the work that we need to do to turn this state back to where it needs to be.
Jaden, I asked you this yesterday when I talked to you for my story I put in the Florida Phoenix. And one of the questions I asked you was, I know you're going to be hearing from some folks, and Sabrina mentioned something like this too, which is that you're 20 years old, you're too young, you're too green, you're too raw. How are you qualified for this position? So I know you're ready for response, so tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I love when people bring it up because all I ask them to do is, look at the record. Look at what we were able to accomplish this year. We produced record-breaking turnout on a number of Florida colleges and universities, and basically every single one of our target districts that we promised to be involved with. We raised over $1 million, which is the most amount of money from any student PAC that I've ever heard of. Here in Florida, but probably across the country as well. And we showcase what it's like to do real effective organizing and bring in new ideas. And so, even if that doesn't matter to you, what I ask everyone to do is look towards the future. The future of this party is very important to all of us, and the future of this country and this state is very important to all of us. And if we're not letting, new blood and new ideas and our younger generation to sit at the table and help steer the ship, then what are we doing? We have to make sure that there's real availability for all of us to have a seat at the table and to allow that spreading of new ideas. And I think, for example, this race is one of those factors. It gives us a real availability to showcase the direction of this party in this state, and the only way that we're going to get out of this mess here in the state is by building towards the future. Republicans have dominated our state legislature for every year since 1996. They've dominated our governor's mansion for every year since 1999. I want to see a change in how we approach things, and I hope to bring that to the table as the vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. That is Jaden D'Onofrio. He's joining us via Zoom. He's the 20-year-old chair of the Florida Future Leaders PAC, who's now running for the vice chair for the Florida Democratic Party. And folks, and we got Sabrina Buspar also here, 27-year-old former congressional candidate. I want to read some text that we're getting from our listeners here, and you guys can weigh in on that. This is from, Tom, he writes in, he says, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but Harris and company had nothing to offer. You can't open borders with a band and then give things away to non-citizens. That's antithetical to my philosophy. We've got another person here, and he says, and I'm a Democrat, he says. We've got another, middle left. Okay, we've got a couple callers in here. Let's go to Bill in Tampa. Bill, you're on WMNF.
Hello. I'll tell you one thing that Democrats can do right now to improve their messaging. I am a Republican, and I'm a Christian, and I am a great fan of free speech, and I'm also a fan of pornography. And my favorite pornography website got put out of business yesterday by the Republicans in this state. If you don't believe me, go on their website. It's called RedTube.
Someone just brought this up earlier before the show started. I don't know who it was, but came up in here. Indeed, a lot of folks woke up yesterday and couldn't log on to their favorite pornography websites. Ray, I thought creative loafing might be all over this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do have a back page section and things like that. Thanks for the call, by the way. I mean, I don't know.
Thank you, Bill.
I don't think you want to be the porn party. But I think what he's saying is there is a free speech thing, right? And regulations and things like that. And what do they look like? And that goes back to what Sabrina was saying and about being really clear about your messaging and who you are and what your party stands for against the other one, instead of just saying, I'm not that guy. But that kind of leads into something I wanted to ask Jaden. Jaden, you talk about these ideas that you want to bring. Hypothetical, let's say, your party listens to you and they want to give you that seat at the table. What are some of those new ideas that you want to bring to these meetings on day one?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the past elections, if they showed us anything, voter registration is going to be the most important thing for us. I think there's very important ways in which we can do our voter registration across the state of Florida. I think our youth outreach specifically on voter registration has been a little lackluster, and we can definitely pick that up. But one of the things that goes with voter registration is having the right messaging. And I have heard you guys talk about messaging. Look, the one thing that's very important to voters is economics, what's happening with their wallets and their pocketbooks, and talking about their situations in their household with that. And so, when I think about our party, bridging the gap with our electeds on the messaging in our state is very important, making sure that we're promoting the policies that they're proposing, but really talking about the issues at hand, such as, like I mentioned, Republicans have dominated our legislature for so long and our governor's mansion for so long, and it's gotten us to the point that we have one of the most unaffordable states in the entire country, and we have one of the worst property insurance crises in the entire country. And I think our party should be talking more about that, making sure that our voters know that when they're going to vote, because otherwise we're failing at our job. And it should be really the single-handedly most important thing that our electeds and our parties are talking about locally, because that's what our voters are feeling every single day. And so if we're not showcasing that to them, if we're not talking about that to them, then I think we're not doing our jobs correctly.
Florida Dems 26, fixing the property insurance crisis.
We're getting a lot of interesting feedback from our listeners. This is somebody who writes in and says, quote, "It's not a mystery. We are drowning, can't afford to buy a house, have kids. We are working more than one job to survive, while both parties are captured by corporate interest in the war machine, and they're proud to have millionaire celebrities endorsing them. Dems are tone deaf, and they are allowing fascism to rise." Sabrina.
Yeah, celebrities don't work.
Is that one of the conclusions of
one of the conclusions of 2024, which makes sense, right? I mean,
but the Dems love it historically.
We do.
Bruce Springsteen,
Oh, we 100% do. Of course we do. Right?
Taylor Swift. Badly.
Beyonce,
yes.
Right? I mean, all of these great celebrities that make such wonderful music and produce great art for our country and culture. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there is a disconnect there, right? When you're just trying to work on the celebrities and the engagement with not just celebrities, but influencers, right? Like podcasts and social media and all of that stuff, you do lose the people.
Let me interject here, because even James Carville wrote this in his op-ed, and he literally said, along with the economy, blah, 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 he says, we got to do more podcasts. This became a big story.
I don't even know about that.
I don't want the hillbilly elegy for podcasts.
And by the way, it's interesting, by the way, a lot of Democrats have said we have to have our own Joe Rogan, blah, blah, blah. Well, Joe Rogan, who was, really, I don't believe, very ideological, he was a big Bernie Sanders fan, by the way. And how the Democratic Party, handled Bernie Sanders going back to 2016. So anyway, but
listen, I agree. We should be everywhere and anywhere, right? Like podcasts, social media, even with celebrities. I think the idea behind the celebrities is that, they have a big following. So if we can get them to message what the Democrats stand for, it can get to the people. So I think that's where the strategy comes from when it comes to external engagement, which, as I mentioned, I've done in the past. And so I do see why we focus on it. And you can't say that Democrats just do it. The Republicans do it too.
Trump literally is a reality TV star.
Exactly. So it's it's both sides that really do lean in on the celebrity aspect. And, as much as I wish we would try and do other things, I do think at the same time, we do have to be everywhere and anywhere. And we have to reach everyone as much as possible. And so whether that's the social media, the celebrities, YouTube, news articles, knocking on doors, all of it. I mean, we just have to up our game in general. But I think what we also have to up our game on is the messaging, right? How do we communicate the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act? How do we communicate what Democrats actually stand for and will do for you? Because I think that's where the gap is, in my opinion, is well, what is it, right? And I think that's where people who went to vote this past election knew that Donald Trump was good for the economy, or believed that Donald Trump is good for the economy. That's what they thought, right? Because that's all he spoke about.
Because there was no inflation, relatively speaking, during his tenure, and people forgot about that. By the way, I want to reset for everybody. It's 11:45. You're listening to the Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry, along with Ben Montgomery, Ray Roa, and our guests, 27-year-old Sabrina Buspar and 20-year-old Jayden D'Onofrio, who is running for the vice chair of Florida Democratic Party. We're welcoming your phone calls, your texts, your email messages.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
I want to ask Jayden a question based on that email you got there. You know, they talk about people being sick of war, sick of corporate interests. Jayden, I think that was a big criticism of the party and the backing of Biden. And we talk about the conflict in the Middle East and where we get our donations from. As somebody who is good at raising money, how do you clear up the messaging around that and regain the trust of voters who are sick of seeing political parties taking huge donations into their PACs? How do you clear that up and win some of those people back?
Well, yeah, look, I think there's always an ethical way to raise money, first off, and you always should be ethical in how we're raising our money, especially as the Democratic Party. Look, we're always trying to represent the interests of the working people and, all voters across, whatever aisle it might be. So when you're talking about raising this money, I think the most important thing you can do when raising money is actually raise it from the people that are everyday citizens, people that are trying to create a movement and build a movement around the issues that actually matter to them. I saw it this year with our team, the Florida Future Leaders PAC. The $1 million we raised a lot of it was from grassroots donations from people that wanted to see youth become more involved in our state and have their voices actually heard at the ballot box. And I think it was very successful. And I think that's something our national party, our state party can also build on a larger scale to make sure that regular, everyday people have more involvement within our party, that their voices on policy are very much heard on a larger scale, and that they're more willing to contribute to the direction of our party, whether that's actually with their voices and what they want to see happen, or opening up their wallets. It starts with actually building that movement, though, in the first place, I think.
I also want to tell our listeners that Jayden is running against another candidate for the Florida Democratic Vice Chair, and that's Daniel Henry, the 33-year-old chairman of the Duval County Democratic Executive Committee. I did reach out to Daniel this morning, did not hear back from him, but we definitely will try to get him on the air before the election, which is, Jayden, that's January 26th, is that? 25th?
25th.
Yeah, okay, so we'll definitely want to do that. A couple more people on the line here we want to get to before we get out of here. Let's see, let's go to Simon in Lakeland. Hi, Simon.
Hi, good morning. Happy New Year, everyone. The question at hand is, what does the Democratic Party stand for? Let me give you one example. It was an article written by Mitch Perry back in February 4th of 2022, where he interviewed a gentleman who was getting an Affordable Care Act, Ed DeBerry, and he was getting $50 a month for the next 18 months. 36 months, that would take him 3 years. He was 62 to 65. That gentleman would be paying $1,800 for 36 months. Myself, during that same period of time, I will pay $40,000 for a family member during that 36 months. So I pay $40,000, he pays $1,800. That's the Democratic Party with the Affordable Care Act. Let's move forward to the current previous administration, soon to be previous administration, the Biden administration. What does the Democratic Party stand for? Well, they stood for open borders. So we had millions of people come across the border. Where do they have to live? Well, they have to live someplace. What happens? Rents go up, the competitiveness of jobs, and what have you. So when you say, what does the Democratic Party stand for? We've seen what the Democratic Party stands for.
Okay, yes, I mean, that's an excellent point talking about immigration, because that, Sabrina, let's go to you on this. That was, immigration and inflation seem to be top two issues in Florida and in the country. People can't really disagree with Simon when he talks about the numbers of people who came over the border the last 3.5 years. That's been documented.
Right.
And did you hear much about that when you were campaigning at all? Or?
A little bit.
Okay.
It wasn't like the biggest topic, right? Because I was in a Democratic primary.
Yeah, right.
So,
people, Democrats weren't really focusing on that.
So we were talking about other things.
Yeah.
But I do want to say one thing about the competitive jobs, right? We have the lowest unemployment rate that we've seen, right?
Yeah.
In a while. And, we're seeing an economy that's growing 3% per year since Joe Biden has been in office. So I just want to say, that narrative that these immigrants are coming into this country and they're taking our jobs is not
and
accurate.
they're taking our housing, I think, is also a lead. We have a housing crisis, but we had that before the last couple of years.
Yeah, and if we have a housing crisis in the state of Florida, maybe look at your state legislator that has been Republican since 1996. Right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't realize that housing is a state issue. The insurance problems we're having is a state issue. And of course, our national government can try and come and help. But when you're electing someone like President Donald Trump, who really believes in the state's decisions, you're going to have these kinds of outcomes. Now, yes, do I agree that there have been millions of illegal immigrants coming through the border? Of course, we can't deny the numbers. But at the same time, this is where we're going to have to agree to disagree. As a daughter of immigrants, this country was built on immigration. This country was built on it.
Right. So let's talk about that. So, I got to say, Paulina Luna, by the way, back when she was on in August, and that is, I was asking her because it seems to me that to get a not necessarily comprehensive immigration, because I know the first thing that there's going to be any legislation is going to be on the focus on the border.
Right.
But beyond that, which I think most people can agree on when it comes to judges, processors,
yes,
all the things that do to fix our system, it requires Congress and it requires both parties to agree on these things.
100%. And we have to really look at the core issue, and that is the system we have created when it comes to immigration. My mom has taken 15 years to get her brothers to this country. 15 years.
From Colombia?
She's doing it from Colombia. And she's doing it, quote, the right way. 15 years. If your life is at risk, if you are going poor, if you are starving to death on the streets, you're going to tell someone to wait 15 years to come to a country that will offer prosperity? Think about that, right? Think about your own family. Think about yourself. If you were in a country where you thought tomorrow you might die, you might be killed by your own government, you're going to wait 15 years to come to this country? I think that's where we have to really think about that narrative. And we have to think about, how do we actually find a way to fix the system to allow immigrants to come here in a good and effective and efficient way so that we're not seeing what we have at the border. And for me, that's a very personal matter, right? I also have family in Venezuela who had to flee. They were asylum seekers because one of my cousins really actually almost got kidnapped and killed. And so I can't blame those people for crossing the border. And we also have to look at the numbers. A lot of people believe that it's criminals or drug dealers. It's not. Right. It's a lot of children. It's a lot of women. It's a lot of families. And so I think what we really have to do, and this is another thing that when you asked Jaden that I thought, is as Democrats, we really have to hit back on the Republicans, because their messaging is a lot of mis and disinformation. It's a lot of manipulation, in my opinion. And we as Democrats have to just stop it, roll up our sleeves, and start hitting back. When we talk about investments by corporations, people blame President Biden. Look at Donald Trump, Walmart, Publix, Marshalls. There's so many big corporations that Elon Musk, donated to him. So we have to really look ourselves in the mirror as Americans and look at both parties and call them both out for what they are, because that's the problem. Is it's Democrats who get blamed, who get shown, who have this narrative of that we're the ones who are messed up and don't know who we are and what we're doing. But look at the Republican Party. It's the same thing, in my opinion. And so we need to start holding ourselves all accountable as Americans when it comes to both of our parties and how to fix that for a better future for all of us.
And stop being surprised that after decades of, intrusion into the politics in South and Central America, we're surprised that people show up at the border because of unsafe countries, that they've fled.
Right.
It's incredible.
Okay, we've got a couple more people. David's been waiting on the line for almost 20 minutes here, so we should bring him on. Hey, David, welcome to the Skinny.
Thanks for waiting.
Hey there. Yes. So as a millennial voter in CD13, I definitely felt the pain of election night, when Fox lose. And honestly, it wasn't surprising to me. I think the Democratic Party has an authenticity problem. One of the things that you saw with the most recent presidential election was people turning away from Kamala Harris because she just sort of towed the line in the middle of the road for every issue. And we've seen that time and time again, especially with the Biden administration, trying to be bipartisan, trying to work across the aisle. When we see that Republicans are totally unwilling to work across the aisle, they have their own agenda, and they're willing to do anything to get what they want. And I think the Democratic Party and the politicians themselves need to be more aggressive, not just in the messaging, as we discussed, but also in policy, also in just using the power that we have and getting stuff done. And I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish anything. And I think a really good example that you can look at is AOC's district up in New York, where you had people that voted for Donald Trump, but at the same time voted for AOC. How do you circle that square? So, I would love to see some more aggressiveness and on both the messaging and the policymaking side from the Democratic Party. And, here in Florida, it's definitely an uphill battle, but I think it's something we can win. We're the third largest state in the country by population, and we can definitely make something out of that.
You remember, David, when Beto O'Rourke was asked about this was in the Democratic presidential primary about gun control, and he said, he came out and just said, we're coming after your guns.
Yes.
If you have an assault weapon, we are coming after your guns, and that tanked his campaign. It's funny, that line, right, between aggressive messaging and
he was obviously a really passionate guy and a young guy at the time. Right at the time, he was really fresh faced. Jaden, let me ask you real quick while we have you. Over the next few days, you're going to do some politic and figure out where your votes are and stuff like that. This morning, I went to a press conference. There's a young man. He turns 24 tomorrow. He's decided to run for the mayor of Tampa.
What's his name?
His name is Alan Henderson. I didn't get to finish the presser.
Loafing?
Yes, it's in there, and then we'll have a follow up after today. But what do you tell young people, Jaden, who are on the fence? Like, what is the best way? Because Alan, none of the Democrats in town actually know him. I reached out to him this morning. They don't know who he is. He's an unknown, but he believes in this thing. What do you tell young people that want to get involved in politics? What do they got to do? What are the first steps? And how do they stay in it and not be discouraged?
I think the beautiful part is actually the call that we just had kind of set this question up perfectly, because I wouldn't be on this show right now if it wasn't for being as authentic and as real as we possibly can with the issues that we have. What I tell everyone that's trying to get involved, be real about what you see within our party and within our ecosystem and politics, what you think is wrong, what you think is right, and make sure that you're willing to work with the people that are, of course, on your side, on the other side, but call them out when they're being wrong. You have to be real and steadfast in your beliefs, because if you're not, what are you fighting for? And so the other thing is, too, if you're really young, just like anyone else, you're not going to know everything, but you're especially going to know a little bit less with your age and experience. So you have to be willing to work with people and hear them out as much as possible. You have to understand that you're not going to have every experience in the world that every other person's going to have, but you sure as hell better be willing to sit down with them and make sure that they feel heard and that you listen to the ideas that they have. And you got to work. You have to be willing to boots on the ground, keep pushing day in and day out on whatever you are working on. I'm of the belief that hard work can always outpace pretty much everything else. Especially for young people, you got to be willing to put in that hard work for whatever you're trying to get done.
Well, Jaden, we wish you the best of luck in your race for the vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. Jaden D'Onofrio, 20-year-old leader right now, chair of the Florida Futures Leaders PAC. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're almost out of time. We've got less than 2 minutes left to go here. Sabrina, thank you so much for coming in. What's next for you?
Well, we're figuring that out. I decided to take a big break after November 5th, and so I am now just coming up for air.
You sound like somebody ready for another race.
Yeah, I don't know about that. We got to, I believe working with Jaden and others is we have to really fix Florida first. And so that's sort of what I'm thinking of. How do I really make sure that the Democratic Party has everything I can offer and make sure that Florida starts to take a turn, whether that's in the next 2 to 4 or 8, 10, 20, 30 years, because this is my home. I was born and raised in Pinellas County. So, I definitely love it much. But I'm so happy, to have been here with you all. And to all the young people out there that are listening, please reach out to Jaden or I if you're thinking about politics or getting involved. My DMs are open. I'm always happy to help people who are thinking about running for office, like the mayor in Tampa. But, I really believe that it is up to all of us to step up and get involved.
Thank you, Sabrina Boozbar, CD13. That was a great race. Thank you for being here, Jaden D'Onofrio. Good luck in your election. On behalf of myself, Ray Roa, Ben Montgomery, Mitch Perry, Skip Sassy on the boards, Irene Matthews on the phones. You're listening to WMNF Tampa. Thank you for listening to The Skinny. Joellen Schilke is in studio number 1, the hostess who loves you the mostest, and she will bring you art in your ear. Dave Decker is in the building also, Tampa photographer. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much for supporting the station. It means a lot, and we're looking forward to a really great, positive year and lots of exciting news.
Happy New Year.
Good to see you, Mitch.
Yeah, great to be here. See you guys.
WMNF Tampa.